Dr. Bhopal, thank you so much for joining us for the Trailblazers in Health series.
Thank you so much. It's an honor for me.
It's a pleasure and honor for me as well to have you on the program. Dr. Bhopal, tell us about your interest in cardiovascular disease, and also give us some insight about the research in South Asians.
Of course. Well, I'm a medically qualified doctor. I was training in the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and I was in fifth year medicine, and I was in the emergency department, and I heard there was a 29-year-old woman with a heart attack. So I went to see her. Students were encouraged to go and see patients and help out in the emergency department. As I was approaching, she collapsed, and there was a crash call. That means the doctors come from all over the hospital to try and revive her. And they couldn't. They tried for about half an hour, and she died. And there was a hush in the hospital. It was such a shock. And it was a great learning experience for me, because the only risk factor she had was she was a smoker, and she had a high-powered job as an executive, and she was on the contraceptive pill. But that's a very few risk factors for a 29-year-old woman to die from a heart attack.
Right. So
I then started to study this and learned quite a lot about cardiovascular diseases. And my next learning experience was I was going to a conference, and a very senior professor of cardiology asked me, well, Raj, what do you think about coronary heart disease in South Asians? And I had not studied the matter. And I said, I don't know the answer, but from first principles, I would expect heart disease to be much lower. And he said, why? I said, well, because the prevalence of smoking is so much lower. There doesn't seem to be anything very particular. In some groups, the blood pressure is pretty low too. And there's a lot of vegetarianism. Mm-hmm. So I was using it on common sense. As we went into the conference, Professor Michael Marmot, one of the doyens of epidemiology, presented data showing that at that time, in 1984, people born in the Indian subcontinent who had come to live in the UK had a 15% higher risk of mortality from heart disease than the white British population, which is notorious for having a lot of heart disease. It's a bit like the Indian team coming to the UK and giving England a good thrashing at soccer. So that would not happen, but it's so unexpected.
Right.
So those are the two seminal experiences that sparked my lifelong interest.
You know, this is interesting what you mentioned about 29-year-old girl passing away. And that's quite unheard, especially in women, you know. I mean, in men, it is still, that we've heard that many individuals have had heart attacks at an early age, and these days it's more prevalent than earlier. Perhaps also because there's much more awareness, knowledge, and and so people are aware about the heart attacks happening. Not many in our community also understand the difference between the cardiac arrest and heart attack. I'd like you to really make them understand what really is the difference between the two, and also about why the heart attacks are less in women and more in men. And part three of this question, of course, I'm adding on three things together, pardon me for that, but I also want to understand from you that why is it that more youngsters now are having heart attacks?
That's a very complicated question you've asked me, but let me just deal with it. We have seen an epidemic of heart disease arise in the 20th century. And it started to hit countries in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And the countries that were hit first were the USA, Finland, other countries in Scandinavia, the UK, Ireland. And that's where the pandemic or epidemic started. It didn't really happen in populations that were living very traditional lifestyles, where they were still farming or working, laboring, working hard, eating traditional foods like roti and dal and sabji, freshly cooked. These were rare diseases. These diseases were very rare in the 19th century as well. Mm-hmm. Something about the way of living brings them out. We've managed to control these diseases in many of the white European origin populations, including the white Americans. We've begun to control them. A lot of the control has happened because of our plummeting rate of smoking. Smoking is a big risk factor, a better control of high blood pressure, etc. What's happened is that as these diseases have been controlled in these populations, they've risen in India, in the Indian subcontinent, and they've risen very fast in those emigrants from South Asia into the industrialized countries. Lifestyles have changed immensely and very rapidly. And a few studies have examined the risk factors in people who live in India and the people who live outside India. One famous study was done by Bhatnagar and colleagues. What they did was they took some people in Southall in London, which has a very large Punjabi population,
right.
And they said, tell us about your brothers and sisters who are still living in the Punjab. So they examined the risk factors in Southall and their brothers and sisters living in the Punjab. There had been a massive increase in risk factors. Blood pressures had risen hugely, cholesterol levels had risen hugely, diets had changed greatly, and no wonder the Southall Punjabis were getting so much heart disease and diabetes. So it's a change in the lifestyle, a very rapid change in lifestyle that brings these diseases out. And we're seeing that all over the Indian subcontinent, and we're seeing it in industrialized countries where Indians have emigrated. Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis particularly are very prone. Bangladeshis are more prone than Pakistanis and Indians, then it's Pakistanis, then it's Indians.
Right.
Of course, India is a huge place. There will be variations in the different subgroups of Indians as well. So to put it simply for your audience, it's this very rapid change in lifestyle to a richer lifestyle where we put on a lot of weight. If I can just take an example of my father, when he came to the UK in 1955, his waist was 28 inches. When I got to know him as a middle-aged father living in the UK, his waist was 38 inches. Wow. That's a 10-inch increase in waist. Well, who has a waist of 28 inches living in the US or in the UK? No one, not men, a few women. But that was normal in those days. People were very slim when they came from the Indian subcontinent. They put on 20 pounds of weight in the first 5 years of arriving in their new home. Of course, that's a sign of wealth. They love it. They look good, but it brings about diabetes. It brings about heart disease.
Right. Despite the fact that we all understand now what you're saying, there's enough information out over there, but to put things in perspective and practice, it has not yet happened in our community. In your opinion, given your lifelong journey, doing research in the cardiovascular disease, what is it that is holding we as South Asians to optimally control or manage the heart disease?
Well, I think I would start by saying it's incredibly difficult for everyone. It's not just difficult for South Asians. It's actually very difficult for white Americans, white British people. It's difficult for all groups. It's a universal thing that is very difficult to change our lifestyles. And of course, the environment we live in makes a big difference. Right. I don't eat sweet things for lunch, but they look wonderful on the buffet. When I'm at home, no one ever puts a sweet thing in front of me, but they've been put here. Our environment entices us to change our own behavior. So the answer is it's difficult for everyone. If we're thinking about South Asians in particular, I think I would start with knowledge. An understanding of what an organ is, a heart is, what a pancreas is, how they work, what a hormone is, how the blood circulates, and the fact that the heart itself has arteries. People don't have that knowledge. They haven't studied biology. They haven't studied human biology. I don't want to be too anecdotal, but my mother was not unusual. She was born in 1925 in the Punjab, and she didn't go to school. All her knowledge came from family. My father only went to school for 4 years. So they didn't build up the knowledge. We have examined the level of knowledge in Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi populations in the UK, and we find in many instances the knowledge is so minimal. How do we even talk to people about a hormone like insulin? How do we even speak to them about a coronary artery? It's very difficult. Even if you speak Punjabi, getting the concepts over is not easy. So I'd start with knowledge. People need to be made aware of how their bodies function, how the heart circulates, and why it's so important. So I start with knowledge. Then there are also attitudes. The attitudes we have as a group is that there's some things that are very important in life: working, getting on, good relationships with your family, good relationships with your friends, hospitality, spending time with friends and family, looking after each other. But we don't have an attitude that we should be out exercising at least an hour every single day. That doesn't mean say you're in the gym. It means maybe a half an hour walk, maybe stretching, wherever. It's not part of our habits. I don't see that in my own family. I do it myself, but that's come later on in life.
Right.
So attitudes, and then behaviors, of course. So we have some great behaviors, if I can say so. May I also say that in many respects our health is great. We look good, we are good, we've got plenty of energy as a South Asian community, and we have very low cancer rates. So that's a boon. We don't tend to die from road traffic accidents and accidents. So in many ways we are good. It's in diabetes and heart disease where the problems are lying.
You know, speaking about exercise that you laid emphasis on, and this is a question more so for the youngsters over here. You know, lately and why I'm bringing the reference of Bollywood, because everybody passionately follows the, Indian films, Indian actors, their lifestyle. Lately it was in news that many of the actors, popular personalities, succumb to cardiac arrest while in gym, while exercising. Now, where do you draw the line that how much is too much? Some of them are really exercising a lot as well, taking a lot of stress on themselves, and, they've had a sudden cardiac arrest.
That's extremely unfortunate. It's a bit like saying that we knew a cyclist who was knocked down and killed. We know that if you're a cyclist, your health benefits of cycling are so great that they overcome the occasional person who's killed by a lorry. So we've got to keep things in balance and understand the pros and cons. Everything has got some cons and everything has got some pros. For people who are unfit to go and do some extreme forms of exercise in the gym is not wise. You have to build it up. And you would build it up by, I haven't heard of anyone who collapsed because they were walking at 3 miles an hour or 2 miles an hour for half an hour. So start with something as simple as that. And I haven't heard of anyone having problems with doing stretching exercises of the kind we might do in yoga or Pilates or some other forms. When it comes to weights are incredibly important. But start with 2 kilograms, go to 3, go to 4, go to 10. We don't need to lift 50 kilograms, or it's 100 pounds. We don't need to do those kind of weights. If you're an athlete or you're a professional football player or something, you do, or you're a professional tennis player, you do. But for people like you and I, and most people, we don't need to do that.
Right.
We just need to keep things in control. And if you keep things under control, you are not going to get the kind of problems you've mentioned. If you were going to get those problems, you'd probably get them in your living room while you're watching a Bollywood film anyway.
Right. I've got 2 more questions for you before we wrap up this conversation. As it is, there was less awareness. I think conferences like this play a pivotal role in raising awareness in the community, about cardiac health. The question is, of course, post-pandemic, when folks are having prolonged illnesses, especially those who have heart conditions, heart disease, what would be your suggestion for them?
Well, my suggestion for them is that it's more important than ever. If you're in a post-COVID state and you've got post-COVID syndrome, what we call long COVID, then you're going to have to be very careful. Maybe stretching. I haven't heard of anyone having problems with stretching, but I have heard of people having problems when they went out for a run. So even though they previously were runners, now after getting COVID, they start running, I've heard of quite a few people, friends who've had problems.
Should they be doing anything different than what they were doing earlier?
I think my answer is previously, you've got to build it up. You've got to start really low, build it up, stretches, bit of yoga, Pilates possibly, walking, and see how it goes. If you find that you get a setback, then you cut it back. If you're doing fine, you build it up. You go from 2 miles an hour to 3 miles an hour. You start with 10-minute walk, you go to 20, etc. So you have to be very careful. But for people in that situation, exercising is going to become even more important than it was before the pandemic.
Conferences like this, how significant role they play in raising the awareness, the contribution of SKN, how would you express that? And also your final remarks for the South Asian community across North America.
Well, firstly, can I say how delighted I was to get the invitation, because the program was stunning, outstanding. We've had a few conferences of this kind in the UK. The South Asian Health Foundation is the equivalent organisation in the UK to SKN. But the program here is fantastic, and I couldn't miss it. So Soni Dodani knows that I don't accept many invitations these days because I retired in 2018, cutting back the work. But on this occasion, I couldn't say no. So it's fantastic. And having been here, what's impressed me more than anything else is the way that the organization has managed to catch the imagination of people beyond the health professional community. All sorts of people, pharmacists and engineers and techie people and business people, they're all coming together to work together. And it's a very powerful way of doing things. I have to applaud the people who have made SKN work. It's fantastic. And that's been a delight to see it. I look forward to many years of success for this organization and its partners.
Dr. Bhopal, thank you so much for talking to us. It was a pleasure interacting with you.
It's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.